Maybe it's not going to let me do it in presentation mode. Can you see that? How about
Yes,
now?
we can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to everyone for joining and excited for today's conversation. I'll kick off by just introducing Mission Driven Finance. We were launched in 2016 with a mission to make markets where markets have been broken, really focused on mobilizing capital to fill gaps and fill financial gaps that close opportunity gaps. And specific to today, we'll be talking about work that we do through our Indigenous Futures Fund, designed to speed up the flow of capital to tribal enterprises, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and developers working on exciting businesses and projects across Indian country, as well as to boost the capacity of Native CDFIs. And so, yeah, our role as part of the coalition of partners that we'll be presenting today is really to structure and underwrite complex financing transactions and really figure out how to get them to work between public and private funding sources across a variety of tools that can be used to fund projects, particularly clean energy projects, which will be the emphasis of today's discussion. And then we partner with native CDFIs and help aggregate capital from multiple sources into these large transactions, while supporting them with capacity building and experiential learning. So really, really excited to be here and look forward to the conversation. And I think I am passing it to Jen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jennifer Ruda. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Huurav Energy. We are a new entrant to the space and delighted to be mentored by Stephen and Florence's teams. I'm also delighted to see all the activity in the chat. This is really a national effort. All of our companies and nonprofits are really available to all of the tribes across the country that are interested in learning how to get these energy projects financed. Our company emerged last fall as a direct result of funding being taken away from tribal governments that were doing so many exciting energy projects. And we felt there was a hole and there was a need to provide bridge financing and access to organizations that could help us, in Ted Piccolo's words, weave together capital to be able to finance larger projects from a microgrid and up. And based on that, Dave Harper, our CEO, decided to form Huurav Energy on the Colorado River Indian Tribes Reservation as a native-owned financing initiative. So we are here to help fill the gaps, provide access to education, just like this activity today, to also provide technical assistance and support for due diligence for both the lenders and the tribes. So we're trying hard to get out there on the ground, meet with folks, and try to figure out what projects you'd like to get financed, figure out what steps might remain to help get you there, and then connect you to a great team. So thanks for having us today. I think it's over to Florence.
Thank you, Jen. So my name is Florence Ledka. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with Oweesta Corporation. Oweesta Corporation is a native CDFI intermediary. We provide capital, technical assistance, training, and a lot of subgranting to other native CDFIs as well as native-owned enterprises and native-owned initiatives as well as tribal communities through our direct lending and participation lending, and then the new capital weave strategies. We work alongside other native CDFIs as well as other partners such as Huurav Energy and Mission Driven Finance to really weave together capital and bring that to the financing stage for tribal nations, for whether that's infrastructure, energy projects, or just anything that's going to basically benefit the community for long-term sovereignty. And so I'm happy to be here and again, looking forward to the conversations today.
We're going to stay on you for a bit, Flo.
Yes, thank you, Kalea. So this is where energy sovereignty becomes very real for tribal nations, because energy projects just aren't short-term decisions. They often last 20 to 40 years, and that means that the choices you make at the beginning of the project could shape the outcomes for an entire generation. And at the center of these choices, of course, is the financing. Financing just isn't about how the project gets built. It determines who truly benefits over the time or how long the project lasts. It decides who owns the asset. It determines who has control over key decisions. And most importantly, it determines who receives the revenue, not just today, but for decades in the future. So when tribal nations enter energy projects, the structure matters just as much as the resource itself. A project that looks successful on the surface can still limit sovereignty if ownership and control remain external. On the other hand, even smaller energy projects can have a transformative impact when they are structured to keep authority and economic benefit within the tribe. That's why financing decisions are not just financial, they're strategic decisions about sovereignty, governments, and long-term economic independence. Because ultimately, the choices we make today will define who holds the power and who benefits for the next 20 to 40 years. Next slide, please, Kalea. So when structured well, energy financing becomes a powerful tool, not just for the building projects, but for advancing tribal priorities. It can enable tribes to own the energy asset, so turning infrastructure into long-term community investment rather than a temporary opportunity. It also allows tribes to control key decisions, from how the energy is produced to how it's distributed to how future expansion happens. That control is central to true sovereignty. It ensures that revenue stays within the community. It circulates locally, it supports jobs and other services and the future development instead of leaving the tribal lands. And just as importantly, it helps protect land and cultural priorities, ensuring that energy development aligns with tribal values and stewardship responsibilities. So the goal isn't just to finance a project, it's to structure it in a way that strengthens the community over time. The goal is to help tribes choose financing tools that protect what matters most, support sustainable growth, and secure long-term benefits for future generations. Because when financing aligns with sovereignty, energy projects become more than infrastructure. They become a foundation for self-determination. And next slide, please. When financing is structured well, the impact of energy projects goes far beyond electricity. It strengthens the entire tribal economy and reinforces sovereignty. First, it can lower both government and household energy costs. This frees up resources that can be reinvested into essential services like healthcare, education, and other infrastructure. It also creates new, reliable revenue streams. Instead of energy dollars leaving the community, they stay local, supporting long-term economic development of the tribe. Well-structured projects can reduce financial risk, especially from outages or disruption. And with more control over the energy systems, tribes can build resilience and stability into their infrastructure. Over time, these projects can improve tribal creditworthiness. Strong revenue-generating assets make it easier to access financing for future projects and expand economic opportunities. Just as important, they help maximize long-term ownership and revenue retention, ensuring that the benefits of these projects continue for decades. And finally, they strengthen negotiating power. When tribes have ownership, capacity, and financial leverage, they can enter into other partnerships on more equal footing and make decisions that truly reflect the community's priorities. So again, this isn't just about building energy projects, it's about building economic strength, resilience, and self-determination that lasts for generations. Next slide, please.
You got it.
Financing tribal energy projects is rarely simple. They're very complicated, and it's never a one size fits all. There's many energy projects in the works right now or in the process right now of development, and they're all a little bit different, and they're all dealing with different on the ground issues, such as connectivity with the local power companies and different things like that. So they're all going to be different. In most cases, it requires layering multiple sources of capital. It could be grants, loans, coupled with tax incentives and other philanthropic funding. And all of these play an important role, and each one of these different types fits into the different piece of the puzzle. But even with these resources available, there are still real challenges. Federal funding, for example, it can be unpredictable, as we know. Delays, changing requirements, or even clawbacks can create serious gaps in project timelines and budgets. And when that happens, projects need flexible financing tools to step in and keep things moving forward. At the same time, many tribes face barriers simply because the funding landscape is so complex. Processes aren't always clear or accessible, which can be missed opportunities, even when strong projects are ready to go. As a result, most energy projects don't rely on just one or two funding sources. They often require 5 to 8 different capital streams working together. That complexity makes one thing clear. Success isn't just about securing funding, it's about strategically structuring and coordinating it. When financing is aligned, it doesn't just close gaps, it creates a pathway for projects to move forward with stability, confidence, and long-term impact. And now I think I hand it over to
me. Thank you, Florence.
Okay.
Yes. And I just want to say all of that complexity. I know all the folks on the phone have already been through a lot of that to get projects identified, to meet with the community, to understand your options, to go through permitting in some cases. So lean into the complexity because the outcome can be really fantastic for the communities, and we're all here to help, and we can help point you to other resources as well. The financing really does start with the community. In fact, the entire project starts with the community. Our company has spent a lot of time on the ground over the last, our colleagues over the last 10 years, and Huurav since early summer, meeting with folks to understand what the needs are and the changing financing landscape. And communities should be shaping all of the priorities, from everything from a community solar project to deciding if there is a housing complex that needs to have solar, to developing geothermal, to looking at opportunities for much larger projects, and really importantly, upgrading distribution and transmission assets on the reservation to accommodate these types of projects. Communities can get together, and often folks have a lot of information on the ground about what makes sense and what doesn't for cultural landscape reasons, for where new development might be going, other conflicts with land use, farming. There's a lot of different things to consider. And so the best source of information is always the community. And we're excited to be there to work these things out. And the financing then should follow from that design and the community interests to help you realize your visions. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of community-driven projects that we're seeing on the ground right now. It's just a fact that solar is very cost effective and can lower the cost of power bills for individual homes, for apartment complexes, for housing developments, but also for the fire department, for the radio station. And we're seeing a lot of interest from different businesses and individual families in exploring that with their tribal governments. Microgrids, which are attaching an energy source to a backup source, so often that means a battery to solar, can be put on individual buildings and networked together to improve resilience for the whole community. So if you're a tribe that has more than a dozen outages per year, you might want to consider how can we do a pilot microgrid to start and grow from there to get key buildings under microgrid support so that you don't have to experience the same types of outages that you used to. That's a very popular type of project that tribes are looking at. In addition, a lot of tribes have really interesting food sovereignty programs, farming programs, greenhouses, an interest in putting in agrivoltaics, which is farming plus solar over the top, to shade livestock, to improve yields, to reduce water use, to provide access to traditional foods. These are fantastic projects that can be fueled by renewable power. And then if tribes are interested in building a lot of power to export it, to build revenue, or building a larger program where you want to be the provider of energy to your community members and go ahead and replace an incumbent utility to collect the bills and even provide the maintenance. A tribal utility could be for you. We're seeing a number of tribes that are stepping into this space. There is going to be a Bureau of Indian Affairs TEDC grant, TEDC, which essentially is the grant that's still open to help tribes explore the opportunity of what kind of tribal utility could work for them, what kind of tribal energy development organization could work for them. But that grant provides some funding for experts to come in and help your community explore that. And we're seeing that grant's probably going to open, don't quote me on it, but I believe around April, or actually June. It's going to be June. The April one, there's going to be another one for resource evaluation from BIA. But there's funding to help you look at whether or not a tribal utility could make sense to help you organize and manage your program. And then in addition, battery storage, really important. When you make electricity, you have to use it real time unless you have some way of storing it. And so battery storage is cost effective and deployed by a lot of tribes that want to have some backup. Another way to provide firm power is to make use of hydropower assets or geothermal or other things that aren't intermittent power like wind and solar. And those are also part of the power mix for quite a few tribes. Next slide. Here's an example of the project life cycle. The vision starts with the community, understanding what could be a fit for your specific tribe, big or small. That could include developing assets on or off reservation, on fee land, or with corporate partners, or right next door to where people live. The feasibility is the next step. What's possible? What's viable? How can we put this in place? Who needs to be involved? And that step often can get funded by federal, state, or local grant support. Helps you also connect with different types of experts to understand what kind of a team you're going to need to develop the size of project you're looking for. A small project on a housing development or a small community solar, it's very possible that a tribe could manage a lot of aspects of that in-house. But when you get to something much larger that's going to provide the type of power that could power cities, you're going to need a professional development team of multiple people that include folks with financial planning, engineering, interconnection experience to help if those folks aren't already available on the reservation. Once you have your project defined well, you'll have to go through permitting. By the very nature of these projects being on tribal land, federal permitting will apply. There's different ways that tribes can have permitting advantages and actually reduce the timeline. I'm happy to talk through those types of things with you, but essentially there will need to be some sort of permitting to happen with the tribe and federal agencies. And as part of that permitting process, you'll move through the design phase and end up with a design that makes sense and impacts to cultural resources and environmental resources get mitigated. And once all those things happen, hopefully you're starting to talk with your lenders and working through what the options for financing is going to be for you. So you can put together a package that will allow you to get through to construction, build it, operate it, and generate revenue for the community. And throughout this entire life cycle, tribal community engagement happens. That's why it's at the bottom. From vision to revenue generation, input from the community is not just needed, but necessary in order to have everybody on the same page, to continue to support through what can be a multi-year process, and also just to make sure conditions can change. You need to have that iterative communication and dialogue with the community to make sure you're ending up with the project that the community wants. Next slide. So engineering, technical assistance, support for due diligence for the financing is all really critical. And tribes can get access to these things now, from helping with a feasibility study to working on an energy plan more broadly, to put together the project plan for a specific project, support for budgets that you need from start to finish, helping with preliminary designs and hiring an awesome team to come help you with the designs that will actually get built, helping with understanding if you have a land code or if you need a land code, if you have to have land assignments, how the leasing could work. Allottees are absolutely welcome to participate in energy development. It just takes a little more work to make sure we have BIA drawn in at the right time to support the allottees' participation. And then we'll be working closely with the incumbent utility or helping support building a new utility. But regardless, there'll be a lot of contracts that are need to be reviewed and checked. And so specialty energy attorneys will be required. Attorney generals at a tribe, super helpful, but most teams will end up bringing in specialty attorneys that can support things like rights of way and leasing. And then you'll have to have contracts with your vendors. These will be folks from planners to engineers to consultants that will come in to help you with the strategy to folks that actually build your project. And so it'll be a lot of work with the attorneys to get those in the right format for your tribe. And I think we're on to mission-driven finance. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so I think you've heard previewed by both Florence and Jennifer that getting these projects financed involves putting a jigsaw puzzle of different tools together and finding the right tools to ensure these projects work. And I think the first precursor to understand for these infrastructure projects is that grants are a really important tool, particularly in early stages around feasibility analysis, around getting the project going, and determining what the project will look like. But they are rarely sufficient to support financing of these large infrastructure projects. They rarely can fund full construction costs, and often you can land a pretty meaningful set of grants, but the grants can come with restrictive mechanisms. They might be reimbursement based so that you don't actually get the cash that you require for construction of the project until after you've completed the project, filed for reimbursement, and that reimbursement has been processed by the issuing agency. And so grants are a critical tool. Most projects that we work on have grants as part of the capital solution, but they are not the only answer to pulling a financing stack together. Next slide, please. So what does a capital stack look like? You heard Florence talk a little bit about some of the tools that are important components of getting solar projects off the ground and funded. And again, grants are one of these, but then also opportunities. These are often also opportunities to explore other financing tools and opportunities. This can look like a tribal investment structured in the form of equity to preserve ownership and sovereignty around the assets that are being constructed, but then can also look at tapping into a range of financing tools like bridge financing, construction loans, permanent financing, and overlaying those debt financing tools with tax credits like New Markets Tax Credit programs, investment tax credit programs, and similar programs that are designed to provide incentive and subsidy to support the building of these projects. I think it's also important to understand, we often talk about capital stacks, which is a finance jargony term, but really just means what are the different sources of funding for the project. In a capital stack, you have to think about it both vertically, which means what needs to come in at what level, what comes in as senior financing versus junior financing, as well as horizontally, which is what comes in when. So what needs to help fund early costs in the middle when you're constructing the project, and then on an ongoing basis once you have a going concern and an operating project. And the tools at different phases of a project can look different. And this is something that we work with a lot of partners in partnership with Oweesta and Huurav to figure that out, to figure the puzzle out, figure out what tools are available and how to pull them together. Next slide, please. So why is debt financing an important tool? I know that, when we work with partners, there's sometimes an aversion to debt, which we certainly understand. But we found that in many situations, when applied properly, debt financing is a very valuable tool for some of these infrastructure projects. Firstly, debt financing tends to move faster than sort of relying or an over-reliance on grants to get a project funded. And so it can keep projects on schedule, which can actually end up leading to savings in the long run from cost overruns and or losing momentum on a project build that is scheduled. Debt financing is also, as I referenced earlier, a tool that can be used alongside grants to cover delays in grants, whether that's because they are reimbursement based or their payments are structured to come in months after services are done or equipment is purchased. Debt financing can help to bridge that gap. Debt financing, at least responsibly priced debt financing, and we will talk in a little bit about what to avoid in debt financing tools, but responsible debt financing has a fixed price, and so it locks in pricing, so you're able to model and see the impact to the project and the overall economics. Debt financing, again, appropriately structured debt financing protects tribal control by not requiring any ownership requirement in the underlying project. And it can be used and leveraged alongside grants and unlock the power of grants by attracting additional capital into projects. Next slide, please. Debt financing does come with requirements, though, and so we want to be transparent on what that looks like. This is a list of the typical documentation that lenders will require when looking at a project. It includes financial statements for the borrowing entity, a budget for the project that outlines sources and uses for funding, analysis of the project itself, including any underlying collateral, operating documents for the borrower entity, and other relevant documents, as well as copies of any key contracts, purchase orders, grants, or revenue sources that will be used to repay the loan. We often work with our partners when they're considering debt financing as part of a project to help pull this package together, but it's important to understand that debt financing can move faster than grants, as I stated, but can only move as fast as information being available to be shared with lenders who are looking at projects and opportunities. Next slide, please. I think it's really important to understand the benefits of some of these debt financing tools relative to equity financing tools. And we've seen a lot in the solar energy space in particular of outside developers come into Indian country and offer big opportunities, but they're really using equity as a tool versus debt and end up structuring pretty extractive structures that can lead to a loss of ownership and asset control. And so why we like debt financing as a tool is that it preserves ownership, it preserves asset control with the tribe or tribal enterprise, it preserves decision-making authority with the tribe, as well as long-term access to revenue distribution and sovereignty, whether that's data sovereignty, depending on the type of project, energy sovereignty, food sovereignty for agricultural projects, and the likes, and then supports the scaling of projects. And then ultimately, again, debt is a temporary tool. And so it's a temporary tool to achieve a project's objectives. Equity is a permanent tool. And so anytime a project is raising equity, you are providing a permanent share in the underlying project to that equity provider, whereas debt is designed to be a temporary tool to support a project, hitting certain milestones, getting from point A to point B, and then community ownership being retained for the long term. Next slide, please. So I think we're all talking on this slide, but I can tee it up and start, which is, and we're going to start to talk about this. Florence will touch on this in some of the upcoming slides, but I think what's critical to understand when financing energy projects is understanding that the financing documents are critical, and it is really important to read through the fine print because those documents, the associated terms with the product that is being deployed, can shape ownership, land rights, revenue distribution, and long-term sovereignty. We laid out over here how we like to think about sort of the horizontal or over time evolution of a project, with grants funding feasibility upfront, shifting to loans helping to fund construction of a project as the project comes on stream. Additional grants are often landed to help repay the loan, as well as income from the project as it starts generating cash, to get to a long-term state where the tribe owns 100% of a revenue-generating long-term sustainable asset. And I think I am passing it to Florence and/or Jennifer.
I would just have a quick item on this one. And the Sovereignty First pathway is 100% tribal ownership, but that can be hard when assets are big. So that's why there's options here. And tribal ownership can be something that happens over time. It doesn't have to be just now we own it or now we don't. Also, you can have a percentage of ownership. And if as long as you have more than 50% ownership, then you're really in operational control of that asset. So there's some choice here, and we're happy to talk you through those different options that can help you actually be able to guide and build much larger assets than you might be able to on your own. It can be challenging to find good partners, but that's another space where we can provide some support. And you can also talk to other tribes that are in the middle of doing the exact same thing, of trying to figure out how to plan their energy future. And if you find other folks that are good partners for those tribes, tribes will often share with you, and you can interview those folks. Another way to find a good partner is an issue a request for information or proposal, and you can target that to folks that you would like to respond. And that can provide you with a lot of good information to help you down the road in decision making to find your partners. Over to you, Florence.
Thanks, Jen. I think Jen and Stephen pretty much covered this slide. So I think we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So one of the things we wanted to cover in this presentation is maybe some red flags or things that tribal nations should watch out for when they're putting together projects with developers and financing packages. You know, one thing to be aware of is that when Oweesta puts together a tribal financing package, we're going to come to you with as much as possible Native-led organizations. We're also going to come to you with local boots on the ground financing options by means of a local Native CDFI that's close to the energy project area that it's being constructed in. So on the slide, these are the types of contracts or agreements that might be risky or unfavorable for a tribe in context of, energy projects, financing, or asset management. So I'm going to just break them down a little bit for you here. So contracts that transfer ownership or control of the asset. So these agreements may give away the tribe's long-term control or rights to a resources, such as renewable energy project. The risk here is the tribe could lose decision-making authority or future benefits from the asset. So you always want to be careful of where the ownership lies. Like when you're working on a financing deal with a group, you want to make sure that ownership is going to stay within the tribe. Revenue sharing agreements where outside partners take large long-term percentages. If the tribe shares a significant portion of revenue with external partners over decades, the tribe may see limited financial benefit. So the risk here is that outsized profits for investors while the tribe shoulders operational responsibilities or risks. So we've seen contracts before where people are asking for 2% of the revenue share, and that's just not feasible long-term wise, because you want the benefits of the revenue to stay within the tribal community. One thing I can say is that when Oweesta does financing, we don't do anything with revenue shares. So the revenue share obviously stays with the tribe with our financing. Another thing to watch out for is power purchase agreements. So this might lock the tribe into low rates for decades, but it also could set a price where the electricity is sold, often for 15 to 25 years. So the risk to the tribe here is, you're locking in a low interest rate, but it also prevents the tribe from benefiting from future increases in electricity prices. It also affects the consumer, so your tribal membership. This practice could potentially, inhibit them with higher energy prices based on what that contract is written for. Contracts that limit the tribe's ability to refinance or restructure. So some agreements contain covenants preventing renegotiation or restructuring of debt. The risk of doing this is it reduces the financial flexibility if market conditions change. So it's really important that when you're looking through these contracts or these financing deals that none of these things are listed on there. There's also deals requiring land control, excessive collateral, or use of ITC as repayment. So some financing deals are asking for excessive land rights or pledge federal incentives like your investment tax credits as repayment. The risk here is the potential loss of land or underutilization of government incentives. And then the last one here is financing structures where the tribe carries the risk, but investors capture most of the upside. So in some public-private partnerships, the tribe might cover operational or market risk while investors take all the profits. So the risk here to the tribe is that the tribe bears downside exposure without fair share of returns. These are all agreements where the tribe could be disproportionately exposed to risk while limiting control, flexibility, and future upside. They are often flagged as deal structures to avoid. And it's just really important that you're having your legal team and other professionals look at any contracts that you might be given in this regard. And next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a due diligence checklist when you're evaluating where you're at as far as financing deals. So the one thing is ownership after construction. So the question is, who owns the project once it's built? This matters because ownership determines who controls the long-term revenue, who controls the decision-making, and the potential sale of the asset. A red flag here would be contracts that transfer ownership entirely to outside partners and limit the tribe's long-term benefits. So you definitely want to avoid that. Number two is operational control. So the question is, who makes day-to-day decisions about running the project? This matters because control affects the maintenance, the environmental compliance, the hiring, and any project adjustments that might be necessary. So the red flag here is if you give full operational control to an outside entity, it can reduce the tribe's influence and accountability over the asset, and you never want to do that. Revenue distribution, we talked about this a little bit in the previous slides, but the question is, how is revenue shared over the life of the project? Why does this matter? Because unequal or front-loaded revenue sharing can limit long-term income for the tribe. The red flag here for the tribes is long-term agreements where partners capture most revenue and the tribe carries all the costs and all the risk. So your investor is really getting all of the revenue while you're still, incurring all of the maintenance costs, all of the risk with the project, all of the overhead, etc. So number four, refinancing or buyout options. The question is, can the tribe refinance, restructure, or buy out in the future? This matters because it's really important to have flexibility that allows the tribe to respond to market changes, pay down the debt if they have the opportunity, or capture more upside. The red flag here is that contracts that lock the tribe into inflexible terms for decades to come. So legal review, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The question is, has the agreement been reviewed by legal counsel experienced in tribal energy projects? This is really important because there's specialized counsel out there that understands federal incentives, sovereign rights, and tribal law nuances. So it's really important that your legal team reviews all of these and understands all of the aspects of the contract. The red flag here for tribes is that agreements reviewed only by general corporate lawyers, it may overlook the tribal specific protections that are available to tribal nations for these projects. And then last but not least, but operations, maintenance, and just decommissioning. So the question you want to ask yourself here is, who handles ongoing operations and the maintenance and the end-of-life decommissioning of the project? This matters because all of these responsibilities carry costs. They have environmental liability, and they also have operational risk. So the red flag here for the tribes is that, agreements that leave the tribe responsible for all of the costly maintenance or the decommissioning, while the partners are taking in all the profits. So next slide, please. So we just wanted to kind of go over all of our partner roles and the services that we provide. So of course, we're all lenders here. We are all native-led lenders. And one of the things that is valuable from a Oweesta standpoint is that, again, we're going to bring along other native CDFIs that are from the local area where the project is taking place. And we're going to help the tribe access the capital while building internal lending capacity of local financial institutions, mainly native CDFIs. Mission-driven finance, it has the same type of focus, but it enables larger scale projects without losing tribal control. So that's really important. And then, of course, Huurav, they do a lot of pre-development and technical assistance, such as feasibility studies, project design, early stage development. And they really can de-risk the project for us before all of the heavy investment comes into place. So, working together, it really forms a really great coalition to move forward. So the guiding principle for our tribal projects, number one, all of us on here understand tribal governance. So we respect tribal decision-making structures and their approval processes. We recognize the roles of councils, boards, and community consultation. So number two, respect for sovereignty. We're going to ensure that contracts and financing honor tribal self-determination and land rights. Long-term community benefit versus short-term profit. We're going to prioritize sustainable economic, environmental, and cultural outcomes. And we want to avoid deals that extract profits for outsiders at the expense of the tribe. So again, we're never going to have revenue shares in any of our financing deals. So our financing is also going to be aligned with cultural values. So we structure agreements to reflect communal priorities on long-term stewardship. And we use financing tools that support local employment, environmental protection, and future tribal capacity. So the combination of the three of us plus principled approach ensures projects are financially viable, technically sound, and culturally aligned. This keeps tribes in control while attracting outside capital responsibly. And I'm going to hand it back over to Kalea to close.
All right. Aloha, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us with the lovely Zoom not allowing me to do presentation mode. I appreciate that. We are going to go into a Q&A. So if you guys, actually, I'm going to unpin myself so that we can see everybody together. You're welcome to raise your hand, come on screen and ask questions. We've got some great people here to answer any concerns. You can put them in the chat if you're feeling a little shy. While we're waiting, Ted, we've got Ted from Mission Driven Finance. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I wouldn't want to get in the way of anybody's questions, but I think that Steve and Flo and Jennifer covered a lot of it very well. One of the things that really, especially if it's native lenders, I'm sure most people on here are native lenders, to understand and communicate, back home in your own communities, if you see some projects like this going, the difference in debt versus so many other avenues of financing, right, is the control that you retain. And oftentimes, I know it feels like you're losing a little bit of control for 2 years, 3 years, something like that, because of debt. And we in Indian country, as you know, well, I'm assuming a lot of our tribes, they're just, you talk about debt and all of a sudden people freak out. It's like, they freak out. Well, the debt allows you to maintain control. Yeah, for a period of time while you're paying on that debt, that you lose it. But once that's gone, once that debt is gone, as Jennifer mentioned in one of her slides, you've got ownership. Your tribe's going to have ownership of the thing or at least more of it for a lot longer, if not the life of it, into dare I say it, 7 generations. So anyway, that's all. I'll back off. Sure, you got questions now.
Michael, I saw you unmuted, not to put you on the spot. Did you have a question?
I do. A little bit about, I'm curious when we're piecing together a project, um, and we think the ITC for solar is going away, correct? But if you have a storage component, does that allow you to, do you get to use the ITC only for the storage, or can it be used across the entire project because you have storage? Does anybody know the answer to that question?
I
Michael,
can
this
say
is,
that.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Michael, we are looking at a couple projects with ITCs where ITC applies to the whole project, including storage infrastructure during the construction period. So once the project is put in service, that does not qualify for ITCs. As you're aware, ITCs are going away, and there is a safe harbor requirement that ran through the end of last year with regard to percentage of construction costs that were already incurred through year end. So that's important to understand. But based on at least what we're seeing in a couple of projects that we're looking at, we're seeing ITCs get applied across storage, distribution, and even financing costs, which folks don't actually always. So we're looking at a few projects where ITCs can be applied towards financing costs during the construction period. So not anything after the project is put in service. At the put in service date, that is the cutoff point. But we've seen entire costs, and we have a good group of lawyers for good governance are doing good work around this, around ITC safe harboring, and providing pro bono support to project sponsors that are thinking through ITCs and what's applicable or not, and they're providing complimentary reviews and opinions. So I think it's worth chatting with them, as well as others in the space that we have a few others. We have a network of others that we've connected different projects to, and we'd be happy to make some of those connections to providers like that.
Okay, so
Just Michael, real quick, we happen to have Candace Long, who's a board member for Huurav Energy on. She's from Winthrop and Weinstein and a tax expert. Did you have any other comments on that, Candace?
I think those are good notes, and I'll just mention too that, when 2025 kicked in, that was when the new technology neutral regime came into play. And so it's under Code Section 48E. And there are some nuances when we talk about legacy 48 versus our new 48E, in the sense that 48E, we have to treat the energy property, the solar, separately from the energy storage. That's just due to the mechanics of the credit and due to the statutory language. So while solar may fall off in terms of eligibility, energy storage will still continue to be available. And so, even in that, the energy storage tax credit would just be for the energy storage equipment if, solar wasn't able to be eligible on a standalone basis. This is all for projects beginning construction in 2025 or after.
yes.
Yep.
And that was my understand that was sort of my understanding, and thank you for answering the question, because it sounds like it sounds like you can still get credit for the storage even though solar is included in a project.
Exactly. Yep.
But you only get credit for the storage.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Depending on if you haven't started it yet, depending on
Yeah.
if you safe harbored it or not.
Sure.
Exactly.
But I mean, starting today, say I'm
Correct.
kicking off
Starting
a
today,
project
yeah.
today, I can only assume that I'm going to get an ITC for storage, and that's it.
All right. If there are no further questions, you guys can have a couple minutes back. We really appreciate you all attending. I enjoyed spending sunrise with all of you natives and native serving people. I'm here in Hawaii, so it was great to see everybody bright and early. We will be uploading the recording onto YouTube, and we will go ahead and, oh, we've got another question in the chat. Stephen or Candace, did you want to take a stab at that one? Would an expansion of storage to existing qualify for ITCs?
Possibly. I don't know if there was no energy storage capacity to begin with, or there was, and now there's an addition of a additional property. If it's the latter scenario, then we might run into the 80-20 rule where 80% of the property that you're adding, or I should say, the fair market value of any of the existing property cannot exceed 20% when you compare that to the additional cost added as well, the 80-20 rule. But happy to chat more about that as well.
And one more thing I want to mention, Leah, is just that, some of these larger projects take quite a long time to design, permit, and get financed, many years, in fact. And so even though some of these benefits for solar right now aren't looking so rosy, don't be discouraged. Solar is a fantastic technology and such a great fit for so many tribes' solar resources. It's perfectly fine to do preliminary planning. Where could the project go? How big could it be? What kind of upgrades are we going to need to distribution or transmission lines or substations to make these things possible? And so by the time you finish all of that good work and engage with the community, the administration's going to change and there may be new incentives that come out and we don't know what that looks like yet. So don't be discouraged about solar. Just take a look at your reservation and the community interests and see where there could be a match now. But also if we could get incentives for a variety of things, what would you want to have? And think about that as well and plan ahead. And we're happy to provide some guidance on those types of discussions. They may seem, really far in the future, but they're not. I mean, to me, in my transmission planner mind, 2030 is literally around the corner, and I'm more than happy to have those longer term discussions with folks.
All right. You guys are welcome to start logging off. If you're waiting for the room to clear out a little before you answer or ask a question, we will be on. Oh, Robin has a question. Flo, maybe you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, what is the question? I'm not seeing
For
it on the
lenders
chat.
like Oweesta and Mission Driven, what is the range of loan size that is most common? And from your experience in financing projects, what are the most common sources tribes use for pre-development costs, which are needed often before a capital stack?
Yeah, so I'll let Stephen speak on behalf of Mission Driven Finance, but for Oweesta, when we're looking at these projects, our sweet spot is basically 50% of the gap. So if it's a $20 million project, you've got $10 million in grants. That leaves a $10 million financing gap. Oweesta is good for up to $5 million on that. So we like to take that 50% of the gap that's required. As far as common sources of pre-development costs, a lot of those are grants. For those types of costs. But there are some other mechanisms where that can be built into the financing costs as well. So I'm going to let Stephen answer for Mission Driven.
Yeah, no, I mean, completely agree with the answer to the second question. On the first part of the question, I think we're working on loan requests that range from 4 million up to about 16 million or so. It really just does depend on the total project cost and the viability of loan size relative to the desired project and cash flows from that project. We work by pulling capital from partners, including Oweesta, into some of those projects and opportunities. And those loans can look anything like just a small fraction of the project cost to help bridge an important timing gap to a much larger piece. I think with pre-development costs, the other thing I would just say is that not all pre-development costs are the same. Early stage, as Jen sort of covered it, early stage feasibility tends to be best financed with grants. But as projects move further along, they might still be in pre-development stage, but there might be a clear roadmap for them to get to groundbreaking and construction, at which point, we're more open to exploring that as a tool. But yeah, generally the early stages of pre-development financing are best funded with grant programs. And Jennifer actually talked about a few that are out there and or are coming.
The other thing about pre-development costs is some of that can really be covered by volunteers and sweat equity, companies that want to work with your tribe and are willing to provide a little bit of help up front. Sometimes that is in the form of helping you get the technical section needed for a grant. But one thing that's just happened in the last year is how much the AI resources can be a benefit. You can, if you have a reservation, you can ask AI, hey, do we have any viable geothermal resources? You can ask if you have a river going through your reservation. Would this reservation be a potential candidate for these types of technologies for run-of-river hydro? And through developing more complex prompts to explain what you're looking for, what resources are okay to check, what baseline you want to use, you can actually get a ton of preliminary information that can help you have the right vocabulary to ask the next questions. And it's been remarkable for me to use that tool to help tribes do some pre-scoping of projects. So instead of handing it over to pay a consultant to do an energy study on an area, you can really narrow in what you need. And if you need only specific things because you've done some of the pre-screening, it really helps control the costs. So pre-development costs, I'm seeing that you probably can reduce some of those by doing some of the research on your own and pairing that with local knowledge about what types of resources you'd like to develop or see in your community. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk more about accessing data sets and modeling tools and things we just didn't have access to a very short time ago, and also training on how to use them through the AI portals.
There's another question in the chat. It's about do you finance transmission line projects? We have a microgrid island, but need to connect to the outside networks. And yes, we would finance transmission line projects.
Also wanted to mention that acquisition can be financed. So if you want to purchase a distribution system on your reservation, or you want to purchase a substation or transmission assets, those are things that the DOE has said can be eligible as well for financing if you have to go big and you're looking to larger federal financing support for your projects. Transmission can be very expensive and take a long time to build from scratch, but an upgrade where you're changing out the cable, or maybe you're adding a higher voltage, or you're adding an extension to hook into the project, like you mentioned, those things can be less expensive than building new transmission. As a typical, kind of a rule of thumb, it's going to cost $1 or $2 million a mile to build new transmission. So you want to put your projects, if you can, as close as possible to existing transmission and substation assets, and then check and make sure there's room on those assets for your projects when you're scoping out what you want to build.
All right. I think we got all the questions. My email was in the original Zoom invite, but if you guys are looking to connect with anybody, you can go ahead and email me and I can connect you with the team that presented today. And I appreciate you all being here. Hope to see you guys in Bangor, Maine in June for our capital access convening. All right. Aloha, everybody.
Thank you.